Thank you very much. Thank you, the organizers, for inviting me. It's my first time in Canada, and I'm enjoying it immensely already. Overall, when we think of Russia and cyber, we think of offensive cyber operations, and we tend to think also about disinformation quite a lot. In my presentation, I will focus on the cyber aspects of Russian information warfare. I'll cover both the offensive aspects, but also the defensive ones. And I'll explain why. I'll start by trying to define more narrowly what I mean when I talk about a Russian cyber strategy. I'll then outline the 5 components that I argue it consists of. Cyber preparations definitely played a role in the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, though perhaps not precisely the role that everyone expected. And finally, I'll also talk about Russia's cyber defense and how Russia became attacked in the war. It exposed many of the Russian weaknesses. I believe that this is not a time when we can afford not to be curious about Russian weaknesses. So I'm interested in Russia's cyber defense, not because I'm feeling sorry for Russia. I think it will also provide a fuller understanding of their thinking when it comes to information warfare. So when we talk about cyber, just a small note, what is this prefix? What does it say? Well, more or less, you could substitute it with the word IT or information technology. It's the technical networks, the infrastructure that we use when we send an email, when we're on social media, but it's also the operative systems for electric grids, for example. It's also the millions and millions of bank transfers that happen every day. And of course, it's the technical networks that Russia uses to spread disinformation. And as is obvious from the examples that I use, it's more than the internet. It's not just the networks that we can access through the internet, it's other networks as well, closed networks. That's included in cyber. But on the other hand, the internet is more than cyber, because the internet also consists of the content that we spread on it, but also the economic underpinnings of the internet, the regulatory framework that surrounds the internet. And then finally, as my colleague who's an IT expert always suggests, it's a word we use to sound cool. It sells books, it gets articles published. But what then is a Russian cyber strategy? Well, formally, Russia does not have a cyber strategy. It has an information doctrine and so on, but it doesn't actually single out the cyber aspects. But Russia is a cyber power. It needs a cyber defense. It needs to think about its cyber operations that we know they're conducting. But it's an orthodoxy almost in Russia that you always talk about information security, information warfare. And it's the FSB, the Federal Security Service, that is very much behind enforcing this. And so they have an information security doctrine from 2016. The armed forces has its concept for its activities in the information sphere, and you have paragraphs on information security in just about all the official security documents that you can come up with. The word cyber, kiber, never appears. But of course, Russia does have a cyber strategy, just as the United Kingdom has a constitution, even if it doesn't have a written one. And it's expressed in the doctrines and strategies, in government plans, in statements, but also in what it actually does, the activities that they undertake in this area. I suggest that there are 5 themes in Russia's cyber strategy. First of all, there's the one that very much centers around protecting critical information infrastructure. Russia has a system with a very beautiful acronym, of course, Gossopka, the state system for detecting, warning, and eliminating the consequences of computer attacks. But it also has splendid IT security companies. The Russian National Bank has its own center and so on. So it has mechanisms for cybersecurity. The second theme is one that has always worried Russia. It's that it's dependent on imports when it comes to IT technology. They've been worried about this ever since the first information security strategy was published in 2000, and probably before that, but they've not been able to do very much about it. It might actually be happening now after 2022, but perhaps not in the way they like to have seen it happen. The third component, and this is where the distinction between what Russia would call psychological aspects of information warfare and technical aspects become blurred. This is the Russian government's effort to create or to establish control over what it terms a Russian segment of the internet. In fact, I would suggest that this was always the main goal when they said they were going to create a sovereign internet. Their main concern was always controlling what content is actually available to Russian internet users. Yes, they created a kill switch, but I think it was always intended just to be used to when they had protest or social unrest. So it's all about the controlling the internet. The fourth component is Russia's efforts to try and influence how we govern the internet internationally. And together with countries like China, they want to see a greater role for governments rather than the multi-stakeholder approach that we have. And then they're always talking about an information security agreement, because what they want to do is to control what content is available to their citizens, not to increase functionality or make certain that you don't have serious disruptions. And finally, the component that Russia never talks about, in fact, they always deny it. Of course, they're engaged in cyber operations. What do we know about Russian cyber operations? Well, they're probably among the top 5. The US is number 1, and then there's nothing and there's nothing, and then you have a group of countries that are in tier 2, so to speak, among the world's cyber powers. So they're in the second tier, together with countries like China, but certainly also the UK and Israel, for example. And there are 4 features of Russian cyber operations that are worth taking note of. First of all, they're active along the whole scale of cyber operations, from the relatively unsophisticated DDoS attacks to the more sophisticated when they enter and take over industrial control systems, for example. This is what puts them in the top 5. Secondly, Russia always denies that they're engaging in cyber operations. I have not come across a country that actually admits that it's engaging in offensive cyber operations, but there's a difference here. Actually denying it is going a step further. I would argue that what Russia does then, it's part of their information operation as a whole, because cyber operations in Russia are always part of a larger information operation. So when they deny it, and we all know that they did it, what they're doing is saying, we do this because we can, and we deny it because we can, and because you can do nothing about it. Furthermore, Russia is quite reckless when it comes to its cyber operations. They don't include safety mechanisms to make sure that there are no collateral damage. The best example is probably the NotPetya virus. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It was a virus that was targeting a Ukrainian accounting company. It spread through Ukraine, among other cities, to Odessa, where you had a Danish shipping company, Maersk, for example. And it spread through their internet systems. It's the most costly cyber operation to date. It even spread back to Russia. It boomeranged back to Russia, and one of the companies that had problems with it was Rosneft. So they're reckless when they construct their cyber operations. And then finally, one thing that countries like Russia, authoritarian countries engaging, is that they use cyber operations against their own citizens as well. So what actually happened in Ukraine? I think a lot of people were expecting cyber operations to play a larger role than they did. We know that Russia planned and did execute cyber operations during the invasion, But it didn't play the role that many people had expected. And my colleague, Per-Erik Nielsen, he wrote a report with a number of hypotheses about this. And I think there were a number of explanations. The first of which was that Ukraine was well prepared. Ukraine had been a test bed for Russian cyber operations ever since 2014 and probably before that. So it was well prepared. And Ukraine received a lot of help from outside. Russia did not. Companies like Microsoft were already in Ukraine, and other countries also helped Ukraine. The expectations on what you can do with cyber operations in a war were inflated before 2022. It is inherently difficult to integrate cyber attacks with kinetic attacks. We have a few examples where they might have been coordinated. But cyber attacks are typically a strategic resource. They're typically conducted by intelligence and security services. In Russia's case, the military intelligence, the GRU, and the FSB. Malicious code and 0 days, they are expensive. And unlike artillery shells, you can't produce new ones. Once you've used them, they're out there. And having said that, I mean, it might be the case that cyber attacks actually played a larger role than we know of, because this is very much the area of the cloak and dagger community. So we don't know the full story. I should say that as a caveat. But finally, and I think perhaps most importantly, cyber operations did play a role, but they played a role in preparing the battlefield. That's when they're most effective. When you have bombs raining down on you, your main concern is not getting access to the internet or doing a bank transfer. So they're more important, I think, when it comes to preparing the battlefield. And what happened was actually that Russia got problems. Probably Russia felt quite confident that it was a prominent cyber power. It routinely ranked as one of the world's leading cyber powers. It had its Gossopka system. It conducted cyber exercises as part of its legislation on a sovereign internet. It had its own narrative on a sovereign internet that I think made them secure. And they viewed themselves as the aggressor in the cyber domain. And then, of course, they hoped that the war would be over in a few days or in a few weeks. And that was perhaps the reason why the head of Roskomnadzor, that's the Russian government authority for monitoring and surveillance of the internet, he said in October 2021, after one of these cyber exercises, that Russia was well prepared. It could withstand any interference from abroad. I love this quote. It tells you a lot about the Russian bureaucratic system, I think. What happened was that Russia became the most attacked country in cyberspace on the 24th of February, 2022. The targets were typically political, government authorities, public administration, the finance sector, Kremlin-loyal media. They started out as relatively unsophisticated attacks. We learned a new word, hacktivism, as internet users around the world were coordinated by Ukraine's IT army to target specific authorities inside Russia. I think this is important as well because Ukraine showed that it had agency. It was not just being overrun by Russia. And as this happened, the regular cyber attacks that have always taken place against Russia, not least Chinese espionage, continued. And Russia did not use its kill switch. This was not what the sovereign internet was about. And Russia discovered that it had supply chain vulnerabilities. Outsourcing software development to Cyprus, for example, is a very good idea as long as you're not at war. And that company actually employing Ukrainian software developers, it's not a big problem as long as your country is not invading a neighboring peaceful country. RUW, the Russian attempt at building something similar to YouTube, discovered this, and it seemed that the attackers actually had access to the source code, which suggests that someone involved in developing the software was attacking it. So tracking what actually happened, I used some databases of cyber attacks. I also used Russian IT security companies, their yearly reports. And thirdly, I used the measures that Russia undertook to try and rectify the situation. And I always cite one of the presidential decrees that came in May 2022, which said that all government authorities had to create an IT security department. And I sat there thinking, what? You didn't have one? So obviously, preparations had not been made. Furthermore, sanctions made Russia extra vulnerable. They couldn't update their security software. They couldn't patch 0 days because they couldn't update operative systems and so on. And then another interesting aspect, there used to be a truce among cyber criminals in the former Soviet countries. It was broken when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. And Russia became a legitimate target because they used to provide a safe haven for cyber criminals. And this is still one of the major problems for Russia. It has cyber criminality on a scale that it has not had before. And together, all of this creates a noise of war. And I think one of Russia's main concerns is that the really dangerous and sophisticated cyber operations could be hiding in this noise of war that Russia is experiencing. So finally, what are the main conclusions? It's a truism, but I think it's worth underlining. War changes everything. The rules that you think apply, they apply no longer. Russia was not well prepared. I think they were fooled by their own rhetoric, not least the one on a sovereign internet. They believed that they could somehow not be dependent on the internet, but the internet is a network of networks, and Russia was deeply integrated into it. I think another contributing factor is that Russia had not singled out cyber aspects. And especially an older generation in the Russian Security Council, not least, because they always talk about information security, they tend not to focus on technology and code, but rather on their pet projects that have to do with cognitive security and sovereignty, or psychotronic influence, and they also talk about the anthroposphere. Very strange, I must admit, but they focus very much on that. Furthermore, Russia was lagging behind, and it's going to lag even more behind when it comes to digital technologies. And sanctions and the overall geopolitical situation has left Russia deeply dependent on China. They try to do overtures to the global south, for example, but they have nothing like the economic and technological clout that China has. And a more general consequence is that I think we'll see a more fragmented internet. I just want to underline, this is not either or, an integrated internet or a fragmented one. It's a question about degrees. And Russia will be forced to develop its own software to a very large degree, or depend on Chinese ones. With time, what a Russian internet user sees when they open their computer or their phone will look different from what we see. And we don't even know what this means for the future of information warfare. But I would suggest that it will make sense to keep our eyes peeled. This is Oleg Khamov. He will turn 70 in December this year, and he's a very good example of how they manage information security in Russia. They have several deputy secretaries, but he's the one responsible for information security. He's giving an interview when this picture was taken, or they sent it with the written answers to the interview. He's giving an interview on cyber strategy, and his room is inundated with old telephones. So I'll stop there.